Redditors who are a missing person, what's your story? Not me. But my brother was missing for around a year. He'd disappeared before, but only for a few days. He suffers from paranoid schizophrenia and would often get delusional, but this time he didn't turn up. We live in Nick and my parents had no idea where to look for him. They'd regularly go to the police station and look at pictures of bodies that had turned up. He didn't have any friends or girlfriends we could ask about him. He had just vanished. A year later we got a call from a hospital in DC. My brother had been picked up on the street, nearly dead from malnutrition. He'd gone to Washington to warn the government about something or other. He oft had refused to eat, believing his food was poison, and lived on the streets for a year. The only reason he survived was because other homeless people took care of him and convinced him to occasionally eat something. He was a skeleton when they found him, full of flea bites. Eventually my parents nursed him back to health. He's still mentally ill but hasn't tried to disappear again. I think about him whenever I see a homeless person. In 2nd grade, I fell asleep on the school bus ride home and missed my stop. My mom always waited at my stop to meet me, and freaked out when I didn't get off the bus. The bus driver looked back, and since I was lying down fast asleep, he didn't see me. An hour later, I woke up at a random school bus terminal on the outskirts of town, and my mom had phoned half the town freaking out. Funny story to tell now, but my poor mother was convinced I had been kidnapped for a solid 2 hours. It really took a lot out of her. I was kidnapped by my biological mother and missing for 3 months when I was a year old. My bio mother has a horrendous crystal meth habit. Took me during a court-mandated visitation and kept me in her various users' sellers' houses. When I was found, I hadn't been changed in days. I was in damp clothing and I had been given cough syrup daily to keep quiet. She was arrested and eventually released. My parents stopped talking to each other since I was 5, but they still lived together. One day, my father took me, 9F at the time, to go shopping with him. We came back to find all the neighborhood looking for me and screaming my name. Well, my mother was relieved, but my parents had their 1,245,543rd fight again. This could have been avoided with one phone call. I wish they could just divorce. When I was young, probably about 6 I think, my family went on vacation to Yosemite. We stayed in a small cabin at a campground. I met another kid who was a bit older than me, and we went exploring. Apparently we went a bit too far, and eventually ran into a bear cub. We just stood and stared at each other for a few minutes and went our separate ways. When I got back to the cabin, I found out that park rangers had been out looking for me because my parents had no idea where I was. For some reason they didn't think my bear story was as cool as I did. My sister once had the entire neighborhood, the police department, and God knows who else out looking for her. It turns out, she had crawled behind the sofa and fell asleep on top of an air conditioning vent for about 5 hours. My mom went inside as the sun started to go down and sat down on the couch to cry. My sister then crawled out from behind the couch and started petting her on the head, asking her what was wrong. Was never reported, but my dad once forgot me at a cafe in the mid-90s during a time when local police was looking for this guy, because everyone was paranoid at the time. My mom had made me learn my full name, my address, our phone number and my parents' work phone numbers by heart, and so when people realized that I was alone they were able to call my mom at work. Shortly after, my dad showed up absolutely horrified. He had forgotten that he'd taken me with him. Make your kids learn your phone number by heart. Got tired of my dad kicking the shit out of me, so I ran away at 15. KSP found me less than a week later drunk as duck in the train yard by where I lived. Dad was pretty upset, but he got sober and stopped being a big dig after that. Dang, that sucks. I'm glad he got some of his shit together. Yeah, we made amends before he passed 10 years ago. Had a great relationship after he got sober. He spent 22 years in the Navy and he was bitter and angry after him and my mom got divorced. I don't and didn't hate him for it. I was just let down at the time because I idolized the man only to see him come apart and take it out on me. It was my first day in kindergarten. I was supposed to go to the after school daycare but I lost the note saying I was supposed to. So the teacher shoved me onto the bus and told the bus driver where I lived. Not sure if that's actually how it went down, but regardless they made me leave. The bus drops little 5-year-old me off at home. All the doors are locked and my mother wouldn't even get out of work for another 2-3 hours. So I do what any little kid does, I sit on my front porch and cry. Luckily I lived right across the street from the high school and this angel of a woman sees me from the bleachers while a soccer game was going on. She comes over to check on me and stays with me the entire time. Meanwhile at the school the staff is going crazy because I'm nowhere to be found. My mother was called and as I'm told, crying profusely. Then out of the blue I see this 1960s brown Cadillac pull up and over walks my principal. He thanks the women for taking care of me and brings me back to the school. Because of my situation they suspended my teacher and the bus driver. And I never do anything without proper paperwork. Edit. Just talked to my mother and apparently the teacher left because of major medical issues at the time. My mother was on the phone with the police after I fell asleep in a cemetery for 7 hours after school. I had a sheet home life. So I'd be anywhere and everywhere I could be to not go home. Beginning of the school year was still really nice outside. So I decided to hit the Dunkin' Donuts near my house. Grab some coffee. And I walked to the cemetery that was maybe 10 minutes walk from my house. There was a really nice mausoleum in the cemetery, which happened to be the structure at the highest point in the city. So you can, on a clear day, see about 15 miles. I chilled there for a while. Just kinda thinking. About 300 feet away is a statue of Jesus on the cross. With other figures. I was kinda tired so I laid a little ways away from it. Just enough to get some shade. Not enough to be laying on it. And I listened to music until I passed out. Woke up a few hours later. Figured duck it. Might as well go home and my mother started losing her sheet. He just walked in. I'm so sorry, where the duck were you? I left and went back to the cemetery. Not really missing, but my parents flipped and filed a missing person report when they couldn't find me. I was left at Walmart by them. The only reason they found me was because they retraced their steps and Walmart was paging them every 5 minutes. My mother threw me away from my family home. It was almost 25 years ago. I was missing person for many years. The worst part was when you call the number from the poster is that you have to answer very private questions about yourself or your past. That only you can know the answer. I did it few years ago. After being missing for almost 20 years. Those questions were difficult. They asked me about my dog. I swear to God my dog was the only thing I missed all those years. I miss my dog. I got lost at Six Flags as a kid and it seemed like the entire police force was looking for me. Not that interesting, but I was 14 and I decided to walk to my then boyfriend's house, which was an hour away walking, but I thought I could do it since it was still in the same city. Anyway, I sneak out the front door while everyone's asleep. And I almost got kidnapped. Some guy pulled up in his car on the side of the street where I was walking. There was no sidewalk, so I was in the shoulder and I made the ugliest double chin face I could make and picked up a rock trying to make myself look super ugly so I wouldn't get kidnapped, and I just stood there with my double chins until he finally drove off. I kept walking. It's maybe 25 minutes later and I've now found myself passing nightclubs and so many people outside drunk and in short revealing clothes. That's when I got scared and went up to 2 policemen I saw in the corner. I told them I needed a ride home. And they asked for my info. I gave them my address and name. They looked me up on their computer and found out there was a missing person report out on me. When they dropped me off in front of my door. My mom was up. My sister. My aunt and uncle and cousins were there. It was the most embarrassing moment of my life and I never snuck out again. I've been missing for about 5 years now. It really gives you a new perspective on how many missing people particularly adults. Either just don't want to be found or simply haven't contacted the particular people who filed their report. The people who know where I am and what happened are the people I want to know that information. For a while I was homeless and met several others who were also in the database or on the Charlie Project. Circumstances take you to places you never thought you'd go. It's not always as simple as being snatched off the street. And the ones who reported me didn't get anywhere by doing so. My trail went to a website of 150,000 plus other missing adults and just hangs out there perpetually cold. I'm fine with that. I had a manic episode and went on a spontaneous trip and blocked everyone's numbers. Don't ask me why. I was manic. I now know I have bipolar disorder and generalized anxiety disorder and have gotten help. A few times actually. The most interesting one is that my mom took me to my grandfather's house while I was sleeping. I was very small, maybe 4. I woke up alone. The house was dark. And no one was answering. According to the Pluto cartoon I watched that morning, I was kidnapped. I broke out and started wandering the streets barefoot in my nightgown in the opposite direction of our house. Some sweet old ladies wrapped me up in a blanket and called the cops. Eventually, through good smaller town police work, he figured out who I belonged to because I only knew my nickname and not my address. I got kidnapped by my mother, who currently wasn't allowed near me. Luckily I got found that night, however unluckily I spent the next week waking up in a different foster home every day. That was a truly terrifying experience and one that stuck with me my whole life. Wasn't reported, but I went missing for a few hours as a teen. I was so depressed and horrifically deep in self-harm that I just said duck it to everything and started walking out of where I live with nothing but my iPod. I walked several miles out of town listening to music and just crying. I don't know how far I walked. Probably a good 5-10 miles out, and I eventually turned back. I jumped out of my bedroom window, which was still open, and I tried to figure out a way to climb back inside, but I couldn't. I eventually laid down on the stone driveway at the side of my house in the hopes I died due to hypothermia, as it was a winter's night. I was out there a good while and nothing wasn't happening. So I eventually knocked on my back door. I was let in by my mother, who was relieved to see me. I have really strict parents and they absolutely did not want me to have a boyfriend. Instead of doing what they wanted, I went and got a boyfriend, age 17. Almost 18, behind their backs, and would routinely sneak out to hang with him. One night, he dropped me off at home and my mom saw us kiss. She flipped her sheet and started beating the hell out of me and threatened to kill me. So, when everyone went to sleep, I packed all my stuff in the middle of the night and left. I walked to my boyfriend's house, clear on the other side of town, and stayed with him. Woke up to multiple threats from my parents about how they were going to charge him with kidnapping or with being a sexual predator. He was 20 at the time. I stayed there until they filed a missing persons report and the police came and took me home. I ended up dating him for 2 years anyway, lol. I had had a psychotic break. One day, I decided to head into the city to spend the day at museums and stuff. At some point during the day, I had a complete break from reality. I don't really remember anything. At the time I was living with my parents, and when I didn't come home they reported me missing. I was gone for 4 days. During that time I'd gone and bought entirely new clothes and threw away everything I had, and I booked myself into a hotel room. I have no idea how police found me. Did they trace my phone or bank account, or is that something that just happens on TV? But they burst into the hotel room and got me seen to, and after that I was alright. But still with no real memory. I don't know what caused it or what I did for 4 days. Took off to clear my head about failing marriage. Contacted wife 2 days later. She filed missing persons. Went abroad, and when I came back, got stopped by customs. They let me go and cleared the missing persons report. Nothing too exciting. Big dig move on my part for not telling her I was going off grid. I, hardly 1 year old, was 10 minutes away from having an Amber Alert on me when I was kidnapped by my grandparents. They were babysitting me and kept me for 2 days nowhere to be found. Then right before the alert came out they filed for emergency custody and won the case. They then raised me very poorly for 8 years until I could live with my mom. My friends and I were staying at a beach hotel for a bachelorette party, and after a night of drinking one of the girls got mad and started arguing about who knows what. It was the same nonsense as usual and I decided to take a walk instead of listen to it. But no one realized I left. I ended up walking down the beach and stood in the water. And I remember very clearly thinking, you've been drinking. Going swimming at night in the ocean is a bad idea. So I walked back up and fell asleep on a beach chair. Sometime later I was found by my friends, who had called hotel security and the cops. Oops. Not quite in line with the question. But when I was in 7th grade my choir group performed at a theme park inside a mall. We got some free time to bum around the mall after the performance. When it was time to go, one of the other kids told the teacher I left with the family of another student. I had not. I returned to find the bus had left and I was alone at 13 an hour from home. I found a mall cop and told him the situation. He brought me to the security office and I called my parents. I held it together until I talked to my mom. Thankfully my uncle was nearby and came to pick me up so I didn't have to wait at the mall for my parents. I guess I was missing, but I was the only one who knew it for a bit. Had something happen during a school trip in high school. Big trip too. One where we stayed in a hotel for like 3 or 4 nights. Rooms were split up in groups and I ended up with a room to share with 2 others. One guy was proper weird though. There were strict rules for not leaving the room at night. But for some reason he did. Of course he was caught by a teacher and for no reason whatsoever told him his roommates were not in their room either and that he had no idea where they were. Panic broke out among the teachers and every room got searched. Except of course our room. Don't think they kept a very good record of who stayed where. I remember the next morning vaguely. But I remember how everyone seemed dumbfounded. Some were even pissed about how we were the reason everybody was forcibly woken up that night. I'm guessing nobody slept well the night before. Was missing for about 2 days. My family didn't notice but the school did. I was 300 miles away drinking my life away at a beach tow. Went there on a Sunday morning and told my dad I'm going to stay with my friend this week. I got on a train and drove for about 3 hours and rented a hotel for those 2 nights. Got drunk every day and made some friends. When I got back to school on Wednesday people were so happy that I was alive. It was only 2 days. Someone started a rumor that I was kidnapped. When I was 6 years old I lived in Colorado for like 2 months. My parents were not the best. One day my mom leaves the door open. Don't remember why. I had never seen snow in person before and it was like seeing an endless sheet of white across the world. I walked out the door to the sidewalk and decided to walk along the sidewalk. I was gone for 4 hours just walking the same circular stretch of sidewalk. My parents drove through the neighborhood. Called the police. They drove through the neighborhood. No one found me until I walked back up to the house. Kinda wish now, in retrospect, that I would have got lost and froze to death. Would have saved me 20 years of suffering. I rode the bus to school. Didn't walk in the building though. I went to a park about 3 miles down the road and spent the day there. Walked home and found my mom's house swarming with police. When she saw me it got so quiet you could hear my heartbeat. I just stood there, staring at all the police, thinking WTF happened? To her telling them I'm her missing child. They all looked pissed and leave after getting a statement and verifying I'm her kid. Once they left, my mother started crying and asked me where I was. Me being a bright 9-year-old told her I was at X Park and found my way home all by myself. She was happy I was home. But furious I did that to her. For the next week, she drove me to and from school. Also the first week I was unable to sit properly. Went to the woods to enjoy some LCD with the friends. Me and my friend. We drove separately. Made it to the campsite before dark and dropped the tabs. Our other friends couldn't find the campsite before dark and couldn't reach us because we were in the forest with no cell service. 9 AM the next morning we go into town to get breakfast only to get pulled over cause our license plate was registered for a missing persons. The Dennis was good after and a quality trip anyways. I was on a camping trip with a group of friends. I'm an area way out of cell phone coverage. The first day hiking in was beautiful and clear. There was some snow on the ground and it took us 7 hours to get in. Longer than we though. But no big deal. We thought the trail going back out would be a bit easier since there would be more downhill. Nope. It snowed overnight. On the return trip. For about a mile we were trail breaking snow that went up to our knees. The low point in the trail was 2 miles of bog that did not stay frozen or get covered in snow adequately. The last mile of trail is an incredibly steep shot up. I told my partner if he didn't hear from us by 10 PM that night to call the state troopers and he did. We left our campsite at noon and didn't make or back to our car till after 10 PM. And then we had cell coverage just after 10:30 PM. We were all fine. Just exhausted. I think the troopers headed out to the trailhead but my partner was able to call them off before they drove all the way out to us.